Hello, welcome back to class. Today we're going to talk about the 6 steps of psychological research. Alright, and before we go into the class, here is a question nobody asks but everyone should. When a psychologist shows up and says, research shows that blah blah blah, a question that should be asked is, how exactly did that research happen? Okay. Who even decided what to study? How did they go from a question in their head to a published finding that the whole world references? And in this class, I'm going to show you exactly how. 6 steps, 6 defined steps is how everything begins. So every legitimate study in the history of psychology follows these 6 steps. And once you know them, you will never read a research claim the same way again. As you already know, I am Viola, and this is our episode 12 of our psychology class. And if you're new to my channel, hello, nice to meet you. Okay, so before we go through the steps, I want you to understand why they exist in the first place. Now, without a structured process, two researchers studying exactly the same question would walk away with completely different and completely unreliable conclusions. Okay, one would ask the question differently, and another would collect data differently, and a third would interpret it through their own bias, because now there is no structured process. So this is likely what is going to happen because of no process, okay? And so this would end up being chaos dressed as science. So now let's look at what happens without process on the left side where my cursor is moving, and you see that questions are going to be asked inconsistently. Data will be collected differently or inconsistently, and even conclusions that come about would just be opinions. Okay, they'll just be personal opinions because now they're just following no process. Everybody's just doing what they want to, right? And even results cannot be checked or repeated. They can't even be tested. Okay, so this is what happens when there is no process. Now, look at the right. There are 6 steps that every researcher follows in the same order for the same reasons, and that is what gives psychology credibility. Now, these steps are not bureaucracy, okay? They are the architecture of reliable knowledge. So you can see the results when each researcher follows 6 defined steps. Okay. All right, so let's walk through the 6 steps, 2 slides each, so that we can actually follow well. So we are going to start at the very beginning. Step 1 is to identify the research problem. Now, this is the most important step. It has been said, even in your psychological or your scientific textbook, that this is the most important step, and I agree. Okay, and I'm not agreeing blindly, I agree, because everything that follows depends on the quality of question that you start with. So you may be thinking, where do even research problems how do they even get identified in the first place? Right? Research problems come from many places. They come from personal curiosity. It also comes from gaps in existing knowledge, also real world observations, or even a new scientific development, right? So, for example, A researcher might notice that people who exercise regularly, that's just a pure observation, okay? This researcher has observed that people who exercise regularly seem to have lower rates of depression. And the researcher might ask, is that actually even true? And even if it's true, why is it true? Okay, so that question clearly stated, and if you see it's even very specific, is the research problem. And without a research problem, you are going nowhere. And I'm sure you agree with me too, right? Great. So the next step, which is step 2, is review of related literature. So here is where many students think they can skip ahead, but you cannot. You cannot. Even when you're doing your final year project, I don't know if it happens in every college or university, but when you're doing your final year project, you cannot skip review of related literature. Okay, so before you design a single thing, you must search what has already been found. You read existing studies, academic journals, previous findings to see how others have approached the same or similar questions. And why does this matter? Because it tells you two critical things. Number one, what findings already exist, so you are not duplicating work, okay? And two, what gaps remain. So the gaps that remain in the findings that exist, if they are findings that exist already of the research problem that you have identified, if there is, that the gaps in that existing knowledge, that is where your hypothesis will come from. All right. So think of it as doing your homework before sitting an exam. Yeah. So that's the thing. Now the third step is formulation of hypothesis. So a hypothesis is a tentative proposition about the relationship between two or more variables. Your textbook is very precise about this, and rightly so. So after reviewing the literature, you form a specific, testable prediction, not a vague guess, right? A clear statement, okay? Very clear statement. So, for an example, this is an example of an hypothesis, right? Which is students in smaller classes will score higher on assessment than those in larger classes. This is very specific. It's very testable too. It is. You see? So you can't just get up and then guess. So after you are done with step 1, step 2, you now formulate your hypothesis, and I'm giving you an example of it. So notice what this statement does. It names two variables, okay, which is class size and assessment scores, and it predicts a direction. Smaller leads to higher, and critically, it is falsible. It is possible to prove it wrong, right? So that is why your hypothesis needs to be tested. Okay, great. Now, if your hypothesis cannot be proven wrong, it is not a scientific hypothesis. And I'm repeating it again. If your hypothesis cannot be proven wrong, it is not a scientific hypothesis. All right. And that is Carl Popper's principle of forcibility, and it is the backbone of all scientific thinking. So we have step 4, which is designing and conducting the research. Now, researchers or the researcher decides how to test the hypothesis. They think of which method they should use. Should they use observation, a case study? Should they use a survey or a controlled experiment to test this hypothesis, right? The design must be rigorous. It must control for anything that could distort the result. So we are going to spend the next several episodes exploring every one of these methods in detail. The methods I just mentioned, we are going to explore them in detail, okay? But know this, everything we cover from episode I think episode 16, yeah, onwards should fit into step 4, okay, because this is the framework they all live in. Yeah, so when we talk about methods, always remember step 4, because you're going to need this method to design and conduct a research. Okay, so I'm telling you in advance, so keep it in mind. All right, now our step 5 is analysis of data. So once data is collected through the methods I mentioned in step 4, it is organized and analyzed using statistical methods. The researcher is asking one core question: does this data support or contradict my hypothesis? Okay, so I gave you an example of my hypothesis, and I told you that you have to design and conduct a research, which is step 4. And by doing that, you have to use one way of those methods that I showed you to test your hypothesis. Now, when you collect data from using those methods and everything, this data should be, you should see whether it's actually supporting or contradicting your hypothesis. Okay, so statistics are not here to confuse you. They are tools that actually convert raw numbers into meaning, into patterns, relationships, and significant levels that tell us whether a result is real or is just a random chance. So we will cover descriptive and inferential statistics in episode 26. Yeah. Well, so that I know a lot of you are like, what is she talking about right now? What is this statistics she's talking about? So we are going to cover that. Okay, so do not bother your head about that, or you can even go read about it so that you can understand this class faster. You can go read about it. You see that I've mentioned it, so why not just study about it in advance? All right, so for now, just know that step 5 is where numbers are turned into answers. Whatever data you get, this is where step 5 is, where it is analyzed. And when it is analyzed, it's going to give you an answer. All right, now finally, step 6. So based on the analysis you've made, which is step 5, the researcher makes a decision. What decision? The decision to accept or reject the hypothesis. Okay, and those conclusions are then published. They are shared with a wider scientific community. Why does publication matter? Because other researchers can now replicate the study, challenge the findings, or build on them in their own step 1. Okay, so now your finding, your research, your study is now existing knowledge of a particular research problem. So now it's published, and then another person looks at it and go like, so result for this particular test is negative or is positive, well, I can see gaps in it. I can see, or they read it and they go like, I have a question. A question just popped out of this. So what did they do? They go back to step one, which is they have identified a research problem in your own research study. Okay, so they go back to step one and then continue, repeat the process. You see, that makes it very orderly. All right, and that brings me to something beautiful about this process. Step 6 fits directly back into step 1. So one researcher's conclusion becomes the next researcher's question. So this is a cycle, okay? It's not a finish line. All right. Okay, so let's look at the 6 steps at a glance. All right. Number 1, we identify the problem. If you have to write this down, write it down. Okay, take notes. Number 2, we review the literature. We are not skipping any step. Step 3, we formulate a hypothesis. Then we go to step 4. We design and conduct a research. Then step 5, we analyze the data. Then we go to step 6 where we draw conclusions. So if you can see these 6 boxes and understand what happens in each one, you understand how psychology builds its knowledge. And that is not small. That's not small. That's not something small to know. That's actually beautiful. All right. So take note of this. Okay, so there are 3 things to hold on to, 3 things we are going to take away from this class. 1, these 6 steps are not optional. Skip any of them and the study loses credibility, no matter how clever the researcher is. All right. Number 2, every research method we cover in this class, which will be observation, case studies, surveys, experiment, every single one fits inside step 4. I'm repeating it right now so that when that class comes, you are not going to be confused. I want you to learn connections. I want you to associate them because it's very important, because each of these classes are connected to each other. They're not separate. So look at it as one big picture, and I'm just here giving you the puzzle piece for you to fit inside each of them. Okay, so do not think they are stand-alones. All right, yeah. So this episode is just the skeleton of what we are going to explain in detail later on. Number 3, the 3 takeaways. Research is a cycle. Step 6. What is step 6? Tell me in the comment section what step 6 is. Step 6 fits into step 1. Okay? So knowledge builds upon knowledge. That is how psychology has grown from Wundt's lab. That's a psychologist he had a lab in 1879. Okay, he was one of the first psychologists of those days who tested a lot of things in his lab. And now it has grown from that lab to the field it is today. Okay, so in episode 13, in our next class, we are going deep on just step 3, right? Which is the hypothesis. Okay, why did I say we are going deep on it? Does anybody remember? Put it in the comment section. All right, so Why are we going deep? Because it is more nuanced than most people realized, and it is these steps that make or breaks a study. So I'll see you in the next class. All right, so if this series is helping you think more clearly, subscribe and come back tomorrow. We are building this knowledge one step at a time. Thank you so much for being here. See you in the next class. Bye.